In 1982, you could walk into Roma Pizza on 18th Avenue in Brooklyn, order a pepperoni slice for $1.50, and unknowingly help fund the largest heroin operation in American history. That friendly Sicilian guy behind the counter, his name was Salvatore Catalano, and while he was tossing dough, he was also moving 800,000 kilos of pure heroin through pizza parlors across 22 states. The genius was in the delivery system. Who's going to search a shipment of San Marzano tomatoes going to Tony's Pizza Palace in Detroit? For 9 years, the Sicilian Mafia turned America's most innocent businesses into the backbone of a $1.6 billion drug empire. And the FBI had no clue. Until one wiretapped phone call brought down the most brilliant criminal network ever built, hiding in plain sight, one slice at a time. The year was 1979, and Gaetano Badalamenti had a problem. Not the kind of problem you'd expect from a guy who once ran Sicily's most powerful crime family. This was a logistics issue. Badalamenti had been exiled from Sicily after a bloody mafia war, but he still controlled something incredibly valuable: the heroin pipeline from Turkey through Sicily to America. The question was, how to move hundreds of millions of dollars without anyone noticing? Then someone had a stroke of genius. Why not hide the world's largest drug operation inside America's favorite food business? Think about it from an accountant's perspective. And yes, organized crime has always been surprisingly good at accounting. Pizza shops were the perfect front business. They operated almost entirely in cash, which meant no paper trail. They had high customer turnover, so constant foot traffic looked normal. They required minimal inventory tracking. Who's going to audit how many tomatoes you actually used? Most importantly, they were so common that they were invisible. Every neighborhood had 3 pizza places, and nobody questioned why. Badalamenti and his associates began systematically acquiring pizza restaurants across the United States. Not just 1 or 2. We're talking about a nationwide chain of crime. They targeted cities with large Italian-American populations: New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Buy a legitimate pizza shop, keep making actual pizza to maintain appearances, but use the business infrastructure to process drug money. These weren't fake businesses. That would have been too obvious, of course. These were real, functioning pizza restaurants that happened to have a very profitable side business. The pepperoni was real, the mozzarella was authentic, and the heroin trafficking was absolutely massive. Some locations were actually making decent money from pizza sales, which only made the books look more legitimate. Ironically, Americans were falling in love with authentic Italian cuisine, and authentic Italian criminals were falling in love with American business practices. By 1980, there were over 30 pizza restaurants in the network, stretching from coast to coast. To anyone watching, it looked like the American dream in action. Italian immigrants building successful small businesses. In reality, it was the American nightmare. The mob had figured out how to weaponize capitalism. This was an international organized crime, operating like a multinational corporation, complete with quality control, inventory management, and customer service. The pipeline started in the poppy fields of Turkey and Afghanistan, where raw opium was converted into morphine base. From there, it traveled to sophisticated laboratories hidden in the mountains of Sicily, where chemists, many with legitimate pharmaceutical backgrounds, refined it into pure heroin. These labs were producing pharmaceutical-grade product with consistent purity levels that regular drug dealers could only dream of. Heroin was concealed in everything from espresso machines to wheels of Parmesan cheese, because nothing says innocent Italian import like authentic cheese from the old country. The shipments would arrive at legitimate import businesses, often owned by people who had no idea what was hidden inside their legitimate merchandise. The drugs would then be distributed through the pizza shop network, where each location served as both a distribution point and a money processing center. The economics get fascinating here. Traditional drug operations lose enormous amounts of money to theft, violence, and inefficiency. The pizza connection eliminated most of these problems by creating a legitimate business structure. Instead of street corners and back alleys, they had commercial real estate. Instead of briefcases full of cash, they had business bank accounts. Instead of intimidation and violence, they had customer service and health department inspections. The scale was staggering here. Between 1979 and 1984, with the machinery at full capacity, nearly 800,000 kilos of heroin entered the U.S., with a street value of around $1.65 billion. That's roughly $4 billion in today's money. By 1982, FBI wiretaps were picking up some very interesting pizza orders. Detective Frank Story, working a drug case in New York, started noticing something odd about the pizza delivery patterns in his neighborhood. Drivers were making frequent stops at locations that didn't seem to be ordering food. Industrial areas, empty parking lots, residential addresses where the same car would be waiting every time. The breakthrough came when federal agents managed to plant listening devices in several key locations. What they heard wasn't the typical criminal conversation you'd expect. Instead of threatening language and obvious criminal terminology, they heard business people discussing inventory, logistics, and customer satisfaction. Except the inventory was measured in kilograms, the logistics involved international shipping routes, and customer satisfaction meant maintaining consistent heroin purity levels. The coded language was sophisticated but simple. Pizza meant money. Cheese was heroin. Anchovies referred to law enforcement because nobody liked anchovies and nobody wanted cops around. A request for extra sauce meant they needed more product. Hold the mushrooms meant abort the transaction. The beauty was that even if someone overheard the conversation, it sounded like a legitimate restaurant business. The phone surveillance revealed the staggering scope of the operation. Calls were being made between pizza shops in New York and laboratories in Sicily, between money exchanges in Switzerland and suppliers in Turkey. The network was operating like an international corporation with multiple divisions: procurement, manufacturing, distribution, and customer service. What made the investigators' jobs even more difficult was that many of these conversations were happening in Italian dialects that were nearly impossible to translate. The FBI had to recruit linguists who specialized in specific regional Italian accents, some of which were so obscure that only a few thousand people worldwide could speak them fluently. What started as a routine drug investigation in 1980 became the largest international organized crime investigation in FBI history. Agent Louis Free, who would later become FBI director, found himself coordinating with law enforcement agencies across 4 countries, tracking a criminal network that seemed to grow larger every time they looked at it. The FBI was working with Italian police, Swiss banking authorities, and Turkish narcotics agents, all while keeping the investigation secret from a criminal organization that had informants throughout the legitimate business community. Undercover FBI agent Joe Pistone, who had infiltrated the Bonanno crime family in 1976, delivered crucial intelligence that helped set the case in motion. He had to learn enough about the restaurant business to be credible while gathering evidence about drug trafficking. His cover was so deep that he actually helped some of the restaurants improve their legitimate pizza sales, which made the money laundering even more effective. On April 9, 1984, law enforcement agencies in the United States, Italy, Switzerland, and Spain simultaneously executed over 120 search warrants and arrested dozens of suspects. The timing had to be perfect. If any part of the operation failed, key evidence would disappear and major players would flee the country. The raids exposed a complete financial picture of how the modern drug trade actually worked. Instead of finding guns and violence, investigators found sophisticated business records, international banking documents, and evidence of a criminal organization that operated more like a multinational corporation than a traditional crime family. The Pizza Connection had been so successful at appearing legitimate that some of the restaurants continued operating normally even after the arrests, with customers completely unaware that they had been eating at the center of an international drug trafficking network. On October 24, 1985, the Pizza Connection trial began in a federal courthouse in Manhattan. What followed was 17 months of testimony, 35,000 pages of transcripts, and a legal proceeding so complex that it redefined how American courts handle organized crime cases. Judge Pierre Laval faced an unprecedented challenge. How do you prosecute 22 defendants for crimes committed across multiple countries involving evidence in 7 different languages? The courtroom had to be equipped with simultaneous translation systems because several defendants spoke only Sicilian dialects. The prosecution team included specialists in international banking law, drug trafficking, and organized crime, essentially a legal think tank focused on a single case. The evidence was overwhelming, but almost incomprehensible in its complexity. Prosecutors presented over 400 hours of wiretapped conversations, thousands of financial documents, and testimony from witnesses who had to explain not just what happened, but how an entire shadow economy operated. Defense attorneys argued that their clients were legitimate business people who happened to be Italian-American in an era when law enforcement was profiling ethnic communities. Some of the defendants actually were running successful pizza restaurants and had no direct involvement in drug trafficking. Sicilian Mafia informant Tommaso Buscetta testified at the trial against his former mob bosses. He had not been part of the Pizza Connection scheme himself, but he helped explain the rules and control of the Mafia and established the Sicilians' dominance over the U.S. On March 2, 1987, after 6 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts against 17 of the 22 defendants. Badalamenti and Catalano both were sentenced to 45 years in prison. But all this didn't mark the end of the model they'd perfected. Within months of the convictions, law enforcement agencies were identifying similar operations using different types of businesses: laundromats, car washes, import companies, and even early computer businesses. The criminal innovation that the Pizza Connection represented wasn't the drug trafficking, it was the systematic exploitation of legitimate business structures to hide criminal activity. They had essentially created a template that other criminal organizations could adapt to any industry, any location, and any type of illegal activity. The aftermath of the trial led to significant changes in financial reporting requirements, especially for cash-intensive businesses. Banks were required to report large cash deposits, and businesses were required to maintain more detailed records of their transactions. These changes didn't eliminate money laundering, but they made it significantly more difficult to operate large-scale operations like the Pizza Connection. The most scary realization was, of course, how easily the model could be replicated. The Pizza Connection succeeded because it exploited weaknesses in legitimate business and financial systems that still exist today. The methods they used, shell companies, complex international transactions, cash-intensive businesses, are still being used by criminal organizations around the world. Understanding why pizza shops were the perfect choice for money laundering requires thinking like a financial criminal, which, disturbingly, means thinking like a very good economist. The Pizza Connection worked because Badalamenti and his associates understood something that most people don't. In a cash economy, perception is more important than reality. Consider the fundamental economics of a pizza restaurant: high cash flow, low profit margins, minimal inventory tracking, and customer transactions that are typically small and frequent. From a money laundering perspective, these characteristics create the perfect environment to mix legitimate and illegitimate funds. A pizza shop that normally processes $50,000 per month in legitimate sales can easily appear to process $200,000 without raising suspicions. People just assume they're really good at making pizza. Now, unlike traditional money laundering methods that require moving large amounts of cash at once, the pizza shop network could process enormous sums gradually through what appeared to be normal business operations. Each location could launder relatively small amounts daily, but when multiplied across dozens of locations, the capacity became enormous. The regulatory environment of the 1980s made this even easier. The international component added another layer of economic sophistication. By routing money through Swiss banks, Italian import companies, and Turkish exporters, they created a financial maze that was nearly impossible to trace. The Pizza Connection proved that the most dangerous criminals aren't necessarily the most violent. They're the ones who understand how to exploit legitimate economic systems for illegitimate purposes. Standing in that Brooklyn pizza shop today, you might notice that the red checkered tablecloths are gone, replaced by sleek modern decor. The cash register is now a tablet with a card reader. The walls are covered with Yelp reviews instead of kids' drawings. But if you know what to look for, you might notice something else. The fundamental vulnerabilities that made the Pizza Connection possible are still there. This story was never really about drugs, and it was never really about pizza. It was about scale, sophistication, and the terrifying ease with which criminal organizations can hide inside legitimate economic systems. The Pizza Connection succeeded because it understood something that most people prefer not to think about. The line between legal and illegal business practices is often thinner than we'd like to believe. In the decades since Gaetano Badalamenti went to prison, law enforcement agencies have identified similar operations using nail salons, check cashing stores, art galleries, cryptocurrency exchanges, and even legitimate tech startups. The business model has proven remarkably adaptable. What should truly keep you awake at night is this. The Pizza Connection was only discovered because of an almost accidental investigation that grew into the largest organized crime case in American history. How many similar operations exist today that haven't been discovered? How many legitimate-looking businesses in your neighborhood are actually something else entirely? The Pizza Connection taught us that the most successful criminals don't break the system. They use it exactly as it was designed, just for purposes it was never intended to serve. In a world where money moves faster and more secretly than ever, that's not just a historical curiosity, it's a warning.